What if Voldemort had actually managed to get his hands on the sword of Gryffindor and tried to turn it into a Horcrux? Would it have even worked? This is one of those questions that sounds simple on the surface, but the deeper you dig, the more fascinating it gets. Stick around because by the end of this video, you are going to see the entire Horcrux story from a completely different angle. Alright, let's set the scene. Voldemort had one of the most obsessive and calculated minds in the entire wizarding world. When he decided to split his soul and hide the pieces in objects, he was not just randomly grabbing items off shelves. He had a vision. He wanted to be connected to the greatest wizards and witches in magical history. He wanted anchors that felt worthy of Lord Voldemort himself. And what better collection of anchors than artifacts belonging to each of the 4 Hogwarts founders? Think about what he actually pulled off. Slytherin's locket, check. Hufflepuff's cup, check. Ravenclaw's diadem, check. Even his own diary served as proof of his connection to Slytherin's legacy. The man was building a set. He was essentially completing a very dark and twisted collector's edition. But there was always one piece missing from that puzzle, and it was the artifact connected to Godric Gryffindor. Now here is where it gets really interesting. The Sword of Gryffindor is the only known relic of Godric Gryffindor himself. Dumbledore actually confirms this. So if Voldemort wanted to complete his founder collection, that sword was the only option on the table. But he never did it. And the question everyone should be asking is whether that was a choice or whether the sword itself made that impossible. Let's talk about what makes the Sword of Gryffindor so extraordinary. This blade was crafted by a goblin master named Ragnuk I, and that detail matters enormously. Goblin-made metalwork operates under rules that are completely different from ordinary wizard-crafted objects. Goblin metal does not just sit there and stay the same. It actively improves itself. The sword absorbs substances it encounters, but only the ones that make it stronger, more powerful, more capable. Everything else just gets rejected. We see this play out in a really dramatic way during the Chamber of Secrets. When Harry stabs the basilisk with that sword, the blade absorbs the venom from the serpent's fang. Basilisk venom is one of the only known substances in the wizarding world capable of destroying a Horcrux. So the sword essentially armed itself with the perfect weapon against dark magic. Not because anyone enchanted it to do that, because that is simply what the sword does. It takes in power. Now flip that idea around. A Horcrux is not a source of strength. A Horcrux is a vulnerability. It is a fragmented piece of a torn soul housed inside an object, and that soul fragment needs the object to remain intact in order to survive. Horcruxes can be destroyed. Fiendfire can obliterate them. Basilisk venom can dissolve them. Even the emotions of true love and devotion, as we saw with the diary in the Chamber of Secrets, can destabilize the soul fragment inside. So think about what would happen if you tried to force a Horcrux soul fragment into the Sword of Gryffindor. The sword's fundamental nature is to reject anything that weakens it. A piece of a shattered, corrupted soul is about as weakening as it gets. The sword would essentially be in conflict with itself. Its goblin-made properties would be fighting against the Horcrux contamination constantly. And even if you somehow managed to bind the soul to the blade, you would have just made the sword vulnerable. Fiendfire and basilisk venom, which the sword in its natural state simply absorbs and uses as fuel, would suddenly become threats capable of destroying it. This is the beautiful irony at the heart of this whole theory. The very things that make the Sword of Gryffindor the ultimate weapon against Horcruxes are the same things that make it fundamentally incompatible with becoming one. It is like trying to store water in a container that is specifically designed to repel water. The object and the dark magic are working against each other at a fundamental level. But here is where we have to give Voldemort some credit, as uncomfortable as that feels. He was extraordinarily knowledgeable about dark magic. He spent decades researching the most obscure and dangerous corners of magical history. There is a reasonable argument that Voldemort actually knew the sword could not be turned into a Horcrux, that his obsessive understanding of magical objects would have told him that goblin-made metal and fragmented souls simply do not mix. And yet, he still needed something connected to Gryffindor. He was one Horcrux short. We know from what Dumbledore shares with Harry that when Voldemort arrived at Godric's Hollow to confront the Potter family, he had not yet created his final Horcrux. His plan was to use Harry's death to complete that last vessel, and the location itself carries a kind of symbolic weight that fits Voldemort's way of thinking perfectly. Godric's Hollow, the birthplace of Godric Gryffindor. The village was named after the man, so in Voldemort's mind, murdering Harry Potter in the very place where the founder of his most despised house was born might have felt like an acceptable substitute for the sword he could never have. He was not abandoning the Gryffindor connection, he was just finding a different way to claim it. There is something almost poetic about the fact that the sword kept slipping through his fingers, figuratively speaking. It appeared in Dumbledore's office, locked away and protected. It showed up to help Harry in the Chamber of Secrets. Snape dropped it into a frozen lake to help Harry one final time in the Deathly Hallows. The sword spent the entire story as a weapon against Voldemort's plans rather than a piece of them. And the reason for that is written into its very nature. This also raises a bigger question about Horcrux creation in general. People sometimes assume that any sufficiently powerful wizard could just point at any object and turn it into a Horcrux. But the soul fragment needs somewhere stable to live. It needs an object that will protect it and preserve it without fighting back against it. The sword does not have that passive quality. It is an active object. It pushes back. It evolves. It strengthens itself. A Horcrux needs a host. The sword of Gryffindor refuses to be anyone's host. What makes this so satisfying as a fan theory is that it reinforces something J.K. Rowling built into the very fabric of this world. Goblin magic and wizard magic operate under different principles. The goblins have their own understanding of ownership, craft, and permanence that does not bend to wizard expectations. Voldemort, for all his genius and power, was still ultimately thinking like a wizard. And that blind spot, that assumption that his will could override any magical property, is exactly what kept the sword out of his Horcrux collection permanently. So, to directly answer the question this video started with, no. The sword of Gryffindor almost certainly could not become a Horcrux in any meaningful or stable way. Its goblin craftsmanship creates a fundamental incompatibility with the corrupting, weakening nature of dark soul magic. And ironically, the sword's greatest strength, its ability to absorb and weaponize the very things that destroy Horcruxes, is precisely what makes it the darkest magic's worst nightmare, rather than its vessel. Voldemort spent years collecting these founder artifacts, building what he believed was an unbreakable chain of immortality. But the one piece he could never add to that chain was also the one piece that kept being used to dismantle everything he built. The sword that could not be corrupted became the sword that destroyed corruption. And honestly, that is exactly the kind of storytelling that keeps us coming back to this world again and again. If you want more deep dives into the magic systems and hidden theories of the wizarding world, hit that subscribe button right now, because we are just getting started. Drop your own theories about the sword down in the comments below. I want to know what you think Voldemort would have done if he had somehow gotten past the sword's goblin enchantments. Would he have found a way? See you in the next one.